right around, end of January, beginning of February, my senior year, I was actually going to like a night class, like a 7 p.m. class. And my dad calls me and like he's a little bit of a casual guy, but he's like, hey, just letting you know, I remember we had wrestled Brown and Harvard that weekend, and he was like, I'm sick, I'm not gonna come. And I was like, well, whatever, it's a random dual meet in, middle of the season, who cares? And he called me on Monday and was like, hey, just so you know, like I saw the doctor, like they're pretty sure I have cancer. Like, why don't you and your brothers come home? And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. They're telling me. And basically, what we ended up finding out that week is he had this pretty, the word, it's not a good word to hear when you hear this from a doctor, but they're like, yeah, he's a really aggressive T cell lymphoma. And you're like, well, that doesn't sound good. So I had spent that week home with him. Once we kind of talked to the doctors and it kind of got left off as this like, we're going to do chemo and see what happens. We were like, okay. So I went back to school. I actually wrestled Columbia I literally got back Friday and we wrestled Columbia on Sunday. And wrestled that match. And then, pretty much every weekend that we weren't wrestling, or if there was a weekend that we were, that Mike was like, hey, don't worry about it. I would just go home or like try to see how my dad was doing. He had been in the hospital for a few weeks. Like I remember I missed the Ohio State duel and people were like, my friends still joke and they call me Duck Boy for skipping that match. But
Sasso, yeah.
I was home literally seeing my dad in the hospital. And you know, he went on like a pretty intense chemotherapy rotation. And actually the first time he went to watch me wrestle in person was the NCAA tournament in Tulsa. The doctor was like, hey, like your immune system's really compromised. Like, I'm not sure if you should go. My dad's like, well, how risky is it? He's like, pretty risky. But my dad was like up in one of the boxes and he's like, well, if you're up in the box and you're really careful about who's in there, you know, I think it'll be okay. And my dad's like, well, if like watching this moment for my son is what gets me a little bit more sick, it's probably worth it. Like he was like, I wouldn't have missed that for anything. So he ends up, making it. I won and everything worked out there. And then that was all 2023. And then I ended up not making the team that year. And then in October, he had a bone marrow transplant. We found a donor, which is really fortunate. And, we're really thankful about that. And that, took a while to kind of, he pretty much had to reset his immune system. He had to get like revaccinated with everything. Like, again, like he was a baby. He had to spend another month or two in the hospital. And then after that, there's a lot of aftermath, right? Like when you have something like that, you get the flu and you're on the couch for a weekend, but like if he got the flu, like there's a serious, danger for him, right? So we had to be very careful, like seeing him and, because of that, it's tough, right? Because I mean, for us, it's tough because it's like, our dad's really sick and we want to see him. But for him, it's tough because it's like he's locked in the house all day. He can't really come watch us wrestle. And that's like, that's our thing, right? He wants to be there for everything. So it was a really scary time. And we're kind of on, around the other end of it now, right? I mean, I guess you never know, but he's doing really well. Like I said, he came to the Open. He's coming to practice again. He's golfing, doing the things he likes. So when you have something like that happen, it kind of gives you a new perspective of just like, yeah, I really want to make this world team, but like at least no one's sick. Or, I had a bad day at practice. It just kind of helped me, take the pressure off a little bit. It was like, yeah, I had a bad day at this workout, but like, my dad had a good day in the hospital. So it's all, evens out. But yeah, I mean, it's tough dealing with that, and I'm the oldest. So I think a lot of it, I don't want to say falls on me, but a lot of it was like, up to me a little bit. So it's tough at times, right? But it's all good now.
Throughout all of that, whether it's your senior year or I guess the fall of 23 or all that you're speaking of, like, what was the toughest for you? Whether I guess emotionally would be maybe this somehow you missing practices, but I'm physically affected you. But probably like when was the toughest for you to right when you found out, or was there a part when it was the worst? Like what was the and you're like I said, you're pressure of trying to win four and all that.
Yeah, I mean, right away, the beginning was really scary, right? Because you start Googling and like, if anyone who's listening, you have someone who's sick, like the worst thing to do is Google. Um, like we're seeing, me and my brother are seeing these like really high mortality rates of these things that he's got, and we're like, what the heck? I mean, there were the first couple months were really hard. Um, there was a lot of times of talks of like, you know, like it didn't immediately get better. I mean, it wasn't like we found out in January and then February he was doing better. So it was scary, right in the beginning was definitely the hardest part. And I think with something like that, it's like as time goes, you kind of learn to ride those waves a little bit better. But in the moment, like finding that, like walking into a class and getting a call from my dad that would normally be like, "Hey, how's practice? Like, how's your wrestle?" To like, "Hey, I'm sick. I have this cancer. Like, you need to come home." It's one of those things. Like, my dad would never ask me to do anything. He would never be like, "Hey, can you come see me?" So it's like you need to come home tomorrow or tonight, you're like, "Well, okay, this isn't good," right? And then you start looking stuff up, and yeah, I guess like from January to really like April, May, maybe June a little bit is when it started. It was really tough. After that, he kind of started to live a little bit better. And when that bone marrow transplant kind of got brought up was kind of a time where everything was leveled out. And that was really when things started to shift in a positive direction.
So he got the transplant, and then it was like, okay, I feel like better at least.
Yeah. After that, it was just like, in a weird way, it's like, stay away from me. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Because once you have the transplant, there's a I think it's a 60-day window. It might be a 30-day window. I don't exactly know. There's a window where it's like, hey, if you get this far removed from the procedure with no complications, it worked. And he kind of had hit that point. I mean, he dealt with some like GVHD kind of stuff, but for the most part, it was good, right? And then after that, it was just like we had to be really careful seeing him because it's like, especially for my brother, right? Because I was out of college at that point, but like he's in school, like you interact with so many people just like going to class and going to a dining hall. You carry some random flu home, and now it's like he could get really sick. So we kind of had to be careful, how often we saw him, and if we felt, any remote sniffle, it was like, don't come home, don't see him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he actually had like a minor setback this past November. Yeah, November. Where he had to go and he had like, some, like I said, you get a little thing and it becomes a big thing. So he had one minor setback in November, but for the most part, it's been really good. Um, and yeah, I guess I'm kind of rambling, but yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, obviously we're glad to hear he's better and he's doing well. And I've met your dad. I know him. And I think he's awesome. So I know you guys' relationship's amazing. So glad. Hopefully people can know what you were dealing with and are relieved for you. That seems like the dust has settled and things are heading in the
Yeah,
right
yeah.
direction
He's doing better and we're all really thankful for that.
for sure.